Hello, and welcome to How Are Our Students Doing? Assessing Belongingness and Marginality During the Pandemic. I will pass along to my colleague, Ann Lundquist.
Thanks, Tyler, and welcome everyone. It's really good to have everyone here today. My name is Ann Lundquist, and we're going to take a little bit of time to introduce our panelists here this morning, or this afternoon, wherever you are. And I'll just start us off. I'm going to be facilitating the conversation, and we're just really pleased and privileged to have three assessment experts and professionals with us today to share the work that they're doing on their own campuses. So I'm Ann Lundquist. I'm Assistant Vice President of Campus Strategy at Anthology, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. And I identify as a white, cis, heterosexual, third generation, currently able-bodied woman. I'm also a mother and a grandmother and a widow and a poet and a yogi. And we always like to start off these conversations thinking, particularly when we're talking about assessment, about the role that our identity plays. And also for me, I've been thinking a lot about the impact of my privileged identities and the ways that I've been shaped by white supremacy culture. And even though I've worked hard to get my PhD, an example of that for me has been that I come from a family where my grandparents went to college and all my brothers and sisters and cousins. And so there's a lot of unearned benefits that I have from that. And it means that I got some economic and educational benefits that I just didn't really earn. And I've also been thinking lately about higher education generally and how we reward and privilege things like individualism, cognitive thinking, goal orientation, objectivity. So I embody all of that, and I'm starting to think about that, particularly as it relates to assessment. So I'll leave that there. We also are acknowledging the lands that we're on. So I live in Tucson, Arizona, which is the traditional land of the Tohono O'odham. And I'm acknowledging and honoring with gratitude the land and the waterways of the Tohono O'odham who've stewarded this land for generations. So thank you for having us here today. And I'm going to let Kellie, Dr. K, introduce herself next.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Dr. Kellie Dixon, also known as Dr. K. Currently the Director of Student First Assessment and Staff Development at North Carolina A&T State University, using pronouns she, her, and hers. As you can probably see or not see, I identify as a Black woman, first generation student, very spiritual versus religious, and all of that shapes how I do the work of assessment. Also, in regards to just piggybacking off of Ann, in terms of privilege, I recognize my privilege being a doctor, a Black woman doctor, which is very limited in the field in general, even more so in higher ed. And so in that space, I do feel privileged for having an advanced education. Also, part of my identity is I'm from Virginia. Currently live in North Carolina, and where I'm from, surrounded by individuals who don't look like me, white individuals more so than any. And so all of my education has been placed at predominantly white institutions. And so that is also part of my framework when doing assessment, especially around my institution. And so I too want to acknowledge the land that I live, learn, and thrive on, that it is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded homelands of the indigenous and tribal nations. I am in Greensboro, North Carolina, and so I'm on the homelands of the Eno tribal nations. And so I want to give honor and respect to those individuals, those indigenous people, and the oppression that they witness as well.
Renee, do you want to introduce yourself now?
Yeah, sorry, I was seeing the
slide. No, it's my slide. I'm going to go. That's all right. It's probably me. Let me go. Let me make sure. We'll get everybody in here.
So while we're figuring that out, my name is Renée Delgado-Riley. I'm the Director of Assessment and Research within the Division of Student Life here at the University of Oregon. In 2014, I feel very privileged because I completed my doctorate in educational psychology, in which my dissertation focused on using statistical models to understand and explore mathematics achievement gaps in elementary school. So as a first generation teen mother, the bulk of my career, 13 years next month, I know, crazy, in the field of student affairs, has been pretty much as an assessment and research leader, coordinating projects, just understanding earlier barriers to success and figuring out and identifying what works specifically for our marginalized communities. As a native New Mexican, I come from a very strong New Mexican heritage filled with green chile, squash, frijoles, corn, hornos, etc. So in my non-academic life, I've helped operate a small acreage farm with my family where I've raised a variety of small livestock and a fruit orchard. I'm an avid homesteader and urban farmer. I've spent most of my adult life focusing on getting back to my ancestral roots as a native and focusing on how to live more sustainably with Mother Nature. In fact, last year I started a podcast, Farm Chica, focusing on how I connect to Mother Nature. So in addition to that, I do want to honor where I currently am at the University of Oregon, sits on traditional homeland to the Kalapuya-Ili people. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, the Kalapuya people were depossessed of their land and removed to the coastal region of Western Oregon. And these are descendants today. They're all citizens of the Confederate tribes of the Grand Ronde community of Oregon and the Confederate tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. They continue to make important contributions today in their community, as well at the University of Oregon, and today in what we refer to as Oregon. So I wanna just take a moment to respect these places. I also do want to mention another privilege I hold as a native New Mexican is most of my ancestors' lands were preserved due to the Spanish rule for 300 years. And so I feel real extreme empathy for natives who don't have the privilege to be on their ancestral homeland. And so I'm really excited to share with you all today how our office has centered assessment and well-being and marginalized communities, and just hopefully provide you all some tips on how to measure those things. Thanks.
Thank you, Renee. And now Katie. I'll get my slides right next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kellie, Aranda, and I am the Assistant Dean of Student Success Initiatives here at Iowa Wesleyan University, here along the Mississippi River in Iowa. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I identify as a white, cisgendered, heterosexual female, a third-generation college student, and a mother and a wife. And anything else right now is kind of trumped by those things because I feel like that's my life at this moment. I'll get hobbies at a later time, I think. I recognize my privilege being a white female here, and also with my third-generation status, I have grandparents and parents who are K-12 educators. So education and helping students succeed has been something that is generational for me. And so using that as a way to help provide success for others and opportunities for others is something that's very passionate for me. I am a trio. I have a trio background before I came and worked in higher education. So first generation, even though I am a third generation, working with first generation students is a big passion of mine. Iowa Wesleyan is located in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, which is located on the Sauk and Fox land. We offer respect to their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. We recognize that our presence here today is a result of the ongoing exclusions and erasure of Indigenous peoples who were original stewards of this land. So we feel it's very important to recognize that as well.
Thank you to all of you so much. We also collectively want to offer this labor acknowledgement. It comes by way of Washington State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. And I'll just share it. I think this is really important as well, in addition to the land acknowledgements and our own introductions of ourselves with our identities. We acknowledge that our nation and our institutions have benefited from the free enslaved labor of Black people. We recognize the interconnected histories of Indigenous peoples who were forcibly removed from their land and the history of those who were forcibly brought to it. We acknowledge the enduring impacts of the African diaspora and honor the contributions, talents, and dreams of our Black communities. And we acknowledge the immigrant labor that has contributed to this country as a critical labor force, including voluntary, involuntary, trafficked, forced, and undocumented peoples. We recognize and honor their important contributions. And in these acknowledgements, we commit to the essential work of moving beyond awareness to action through meaningful changes at our institutions and our communities. So I hope that by way of introduction, we're also helping to set some of the context for you and with you about our approach to this topic, because we want to talk about belongingness. And we need to think about our own identities, the identities of others, privilege and place when we're thinking about that. So I'm going to take the first part of our time here just to set a little bit of context, sort of from the literature and a little bit of data that we've worked on at Anthology. And then the bulk of our time is going to be our three panelists sharing their experiences and their assessment work at their particular institution. And as Tyler mentioned, feel free to chat some questions in as we go through any part of this. And we're going to dedicate a bit of time to a conversation amongst and between our panelists and also with you via the question box. So I just want to position this conversation a little bit and really as a student success, retention, persistence, and graduation question. We really know that student affairs is central to this work. And we know a lot from the literature about the ways in which there are many variables, right, that lead to success and retention, including educational purposeful activities and satisfaction. There's a lot of work in this area. And that institutions that focus on mattering and greater student involvement are going to be more successful in creating campuses where students are motivated to learn and where retention is high. So what we'd like to do right now is just take a minute in the question box. And before we dive into sharing a little bit of the literature, what are the perspectives that you all have as attendees and participants right now about the kinds of things that you think impact belonging? So when we think about students feeling like they belong on our campuses and being a part and integrated into the institutional fabric, and the institution being a welcoming place that is adaptive and inclusive for all students, what are some of the sorts of things that come to mind for you? And you feel free to chat some of those into the question box. Relationships with staff and faculty, being able to navigate resources, feeling heard and valued, seeing themselves represented in marketing materials or across all kinds of aspects of the institution's visual imagery, relationships with staff and faculty, relationships with peers. Thank you so much. Good. Those are all definitely on point. And we'll talk a little bit more about that now, and then explicitly in the work that our panelists are doing. So this idea of belonging really is vital to our existence as humans, right? So it's causes students, for example, to do things like visit the campus in the first place or join a club or make friends so they feel like they belong. And students are constantly monitoring for social cues that signal their belonging status. And then that shapes their lens about how they make meaning out of all kinds of other experiences. So if they don't feel like they belong, almost a lot of other things that we do can be wiped away. Strayhorn has done a lot of work in this area around the sense of belonging that leads to positive outcomes in student success, and also the fact that this differs a lot by different social identities. And so there's a lot of belonging questions, right? Like, where am I, and who's like me, and am I the only one, and will people like me, and will I make friends, and am I valued? Who looks like me? So there's a lot of belonging questions. And then a second related domain, if you will, is the idea of mattering. So again, we have research in this area about mattering. This is one signal to students that they matter, or that they belong, is that they feel like they matter to their peers, to the faculty, to the institution. And we know that when institutions create environments that clearly indicate to all students that they matter, it will then urge them or prompt them on into other things like becoming involved and staying engaged in class. And mattering is also related to a lot of other key factors like engagement and involvement, being able to integrate their social and academic experiences, and that sense of belonging. And there's some research that indicates that the college friend social support is one of the higher predictors of mattering. and mattering to the college. So feeling like the college recognizes who I am is one of the most powerful predictors of academic stress levels. So mattering is affected by quite a few different things. Attention, being paid noticed or not being invisible, feeling that you're important, that idea of ego extension, that someone's going to share in your pride of accomplishment and sympathize with your failures, the idea of dependence or a sense of being needed, and appreciation, that your efforts are in fact appreciated inside and outside the classroom. So conversely, we have the concept of marginality, right? So a sense of not fitting in or not belonging. And experiences of alienation or social isolation can raise doubts for a student about their own capacities, and it can negatively impact their academic performance, erode their confidence. And it also can lead to a lot of adverse outcomes, such as depression, and it's often a key factor in why students leave college or stop out of college. It happens differently, again, for different populations, and we recognize that there's different impact in terms of marginality based on folks' identity. So racism and discrimination can lead to a lower sense of belonging for marginalized group, and that there's a higher and greater impact for BIPOC students. And then lastly, we have this concept of social support. So social support is really important, particularly in times of transition. So we tend to think about it when the beginning of a student's experience with us, but it's also a necessary but insufficient condition for students' sense of belonging, according to Strayhorn. So things like relationships with students and faculty and staff contribute to mattering, and this kind of support that the faculty and staff are giving is the social support. So they're giving attention, they're expressing care and concern, they're responsive to student needs. Students tend not to distinguish in their minds between student services and academics, although we tend to organize ourselves in that way. And so we might be thinking that we're providing social support that fits all students, but we might be missing key elements for different populations of students. And we also might be just unaware of support services across our large institution. And there's all kinds of types of support. So emotional, informational, helping students understand their own accomplishments. And then there's various sources like friends, family members, professors, classmates, the community, elders. So there's a lot of different people that can provide this support, some tied directly to the campus and others who are not. So I wanted to mention here just briefly, because I do a lot of work with Dr. Gavin Henning and with Aaron Bentram. And there's a lot of literature out there, but it's sort of siloed, and it's spread around. And so there's a book that's going to be forthcoming in 2022 called The Impact of Belonging in College, Implications for Student Persistence, Retention, and Success. So it's going to summarize the theory. It's going to focus on identity and intersectionality and also practical application. And there's actually going to be a section in the text around assessment tools to measure belonging. So I'm pretty excited that this is coming out, and grateful to our colleagues who are contributing to that literature. I'm going to wrap up this section here by just mentioning briefly that at Anthology in the fall, we conducted what we call the Pandemic College Student Experience Survey. A student sentiment survey where we looked at what was going on. This was around October of last year. And we've got a white paper on that will be shared afterwards as part of the resources. But I just wanted to mention here that we created some of our items on this instrument, in addition to some other things that we gathered data around these student success outcomes. And you'll recognize here quite a few of these belonging, mattering, social support elements that we asked students about. So whether or not they get the help they need as social support, the idea of faculty and staff who care, or feeling included in a circle of friends, feeling like they're a part of the college community, or like the college is a good fit. These are all aspects of belonging and mattering. And so we'd love for you to take a look at that white paper. We also asked some open-ended questions about students' experience. This was, again, October of 20. And students were feeling that loss of missing out, particularly on the social aspects of college life. not making memories or friends, and being so removed and distant in the computer landscape. And there were also a lot of comments that clearly indicated that one of the best things that an institution could do is firmly recognize that students were struggling and that they needed extra support, and that they were feeling, with everything going on in the world, and this had to do with racism, with the political climate, with the pandemic, and the cumulative effect of that, and the differential impact on different identities and marginalized populations, that every day there was this impact that was making their college experience stressful, and but feeling more depressed and bleak about the future. So finding out how our students are doing, finding out how they feel that they're belonging, what we can do to support them should be top of mind for campuses all the time, but particularly at this juncture. And then I'll leave you with this quote from Terrell Strayhorn, which I love because he quotes Beyonce. And he says that it's crystal clear that a true sense of belonging is about finding oneself, living authentically, and creating community amongst those who accept people for who they are, as they are, flaws and all. So we're going to turn now to figuring out what are some of those ways to assess belonging and how are certain campuses doing that. I think, Tyler, we have a quick poll that we're going to do before we jump into that. And so Tyler's going to pull that poll up. And we're just curious to see, of those of you who are on the call today, how many of you are currently not conducing, but conducting assessment related to belongingness. So you're not doing it at all right now. You're talking about it. You're actually engaged in some assessment right now, or you're here because you're thinking about wanting to do that. Looks like, and I'm looking at the results as they're coming in, it looks like about 30% are not currently assessing at all right now. This is going to be very evenly distributed. 26% not currently assessing. There we go, Tyler. The magic of technology. So great. So we're spread across the horizon here, and then some of you are here to learn specifically about some ideas in order to get started. So thanks for sharing that. We appreciate that. And then with that, I will be advancing the slides, and we're going to have Kellie, Dr. K, talk to us about what you're doing at North Carolina A&T. Thanks, Kellie.
Hello. Thank you, Anne, for that. So I currently work at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, which is located in Greensboro, North Carolina, and as today stands as the largest historically Black college and university in the nation. I believe last fall we were around 12,756 students. Yeah, I know the exact number. We are a doctoral high research activity land grant university that was founded in 1891. So I just want to give a brief history lesson for those who may and may not know. HBCUs were found, the first HBCU was founded in 1837, Cheyney University in Pennsylvania. And HBCUs were founded primarily solely because Blacks were not given the opportunity to be educated at a higher level at that time. And since then, hundreds of HBCUs have existed. We've had some that have closed their doors, and currently, depending on who you ask, we're roughly anywhere between 101 and 105 or 107 accredited HBCUs. So depending on what you're looking at in terms of finding that number. But more particular to A&T is that we are the only HBCU in North Carolina that holds all designations of doctoral high research activity land grant university. We have a very long and rich history as it relates to the struggle for civil rights for African Americans in the United States. And so if you're familiar with the A&T Forum, it is the four freshmen in the 1960s that were students here at A&T initiated and started the sit-in movement in downtown Greensboro at the lunch counter. And so we honor them on February 1st in Greensboro. It is a big occasion. And from that, other sit-ins began to exist around the world. And so we definitely honor those 4 freshman students that started that. And because of that, we pride ourselves in being active in terms of social justice, et cetera. And we have student body presidents and student leaders that are well-versed in activism around the campus and in the community. So once again, in fall, we were at 12,756 students, making us the largest HBCU in the nation. And feel free to follow us on Twitter as well. So, so what are we doing with regard to, what are we doing? I think this is a slide. We need to go back a slide.
Hold on, Kelly, just a minute. My mouse got away from me. I'm bringing it back. I'm bringing it back. There, is this the right one?
Yes, that's where we are. So okay. One of the things, I want to bring notice to and listen to Ann discuss belongingness, social support, marginality, mattering. And I want to honor my good colleague and friend, Dr. Terrell Strayhorn, who has done a lot of work around belonging, who's at Virginia Union University and is also leading the Center for the Study of HBCUs. And so one of the things that I always have to say in any presentation or conversation I give is that we want to give honor to our institutions through research. And so in order to do that, I'm really pushing the needle in terms of us writing our own stories and giving narrative to that, right? And so as we think about belongingness, mattering, and social support at a HBCU, more particularly A&T, in the midst of a pandemic, not only did we have to deal with COVID, like many institutions, and then thinking about this whole idea of college access. And so now we're thinking about students who may not have reported being homeless, but now they have no place to go. Students that come from areas where there is no internet versus always being on campus with that access. And so those conversations began to happen a lot amongst staff and as well as students. But in the midst of that, what we were finding in just conversations with students is the high stress levels. And so having to really move from in-person to virtual rather quickly, and then also taking consideration online learning, right, and how that looks. And so as much as it was stressful for students, imagining how stressful it was for our faculty that were so heavily used to being in the classroom teaching and now having to learn different strategies and different platforms to move that to an online environment. So it wasn't just the students, but also our staff as well that was navigating those spaces. The other thing that we, especially I noticed in my space, was navigating the college space while having to attend to other obligations. So at our institution, I see a lot of students that not only just attend classes full-time, but also work part-time, and having to provide those resources to families if need be, those that were not only working, but also being a part of so many organizations because they wanted to be involved so that they could then pursue opportunities for internships. And so being able to navigate that differently in a virtual space. And so now you don't have the luxury per se to go to class, maybe go to work and all these other obligations, and then come back to your space of peace, of quietness. Now we have students that may be with their families, where they have younger siblings, older siblings, et cetera, that they may or may not be taken care of, and how that plays a role in their education and student success. And then the different access to mentors and safe spaces on campus. So at HBCUs, we are known to be a nurturing space to our students, that we talk about different aspects of life. It's not just here to get a degree, but really hone in on your self-awareness as an individual. And so with majority of our entities, especially in student affairs, being virtual, that's really hard for our students. So for me in particular, I had students that were used to coming to my office after class just to sit down and talk and kind of debrief. they don't have that luxury per se. Now is I really have to plan a meeting to see Dr. K now, and that's going to be virtual. And so in the beginning stages of COVID, that was a hectic conversation with my students that I would normally meet in regards to what that looks like now. And so even in the virtual space, I'm spending a lot more time on Zoom, as many of you all are, talking with those students. And then just the whole atmosphere of HBCUs being family oriented and not having that experience. And I think it really hits for our first year students. We have a high population of first gen students too. And so what that means to be ready to go to an institution, more particularly HBCU, and then being hit with this pandemic and having to choose to stay home or come on campus as it relates to the pandemic. The other piece that hit us was this uptick in racial injustice. And as I say, racial justice has always been here. It's just that in these past couple of years, months, it's been readily available on the news and social media. And so it's been more visible. And so having to deal with not only a pandemic and its restrictions, but also what was going on in terms of Black Lives Matter. And so we had a lot of conversations around, students wanting to protest and then having to think about the pandemic restrictions. And so as staff, how do we navigate that to even educate our students in moving forward, because we are so rooted in activism. And so as we think about the belongingness mattering for our students, it's also a part of us as staff as well, because we're going through the same scenarios as it relates to what's going on in society. And so the increase in HBCU exposure because of racial injustice, and also the election of Vice President Kamala Harris, a Howard University graduate, Black identified woman, HBCU grad, having that type of atmosphere and space in the White House, in addition to racial injustice, brought a huge light on HBCUs. And so individuals starting to see what exactly is going on the HBCU campus. And how does that measure against belongingness, matter, and social support? And so also understanding the generational differences regarding the virtual landscape. There we go. And so how are we assessing? So a couple of things we've been doing: intentional conversations with students one-on-one. It's nothing like having an open-ended conversation with a student. One of the biggest highlights that we've been doing for the past 2 semesters is working with Wake Forest University Wellbeing Center, where they have an assessment, and we've been a part of that assessment in the spring 2020 and fall 2020. And so currently still looking at some of those data points. The assessment in the fall paid particular attention to COVID. And so just getting those data points as it relates to our students and how they're experiencing COVID and how that's impacting their well-being. And so right now we're really focused on well-being on our campuses because of COVID and then the uptick in racial injustice. Also our sophomore and senior surveys, looking at those data points to pinpoint, certain target points for sophomores and seniors as it relates to their college experience. And then of course, as I sit as the assessment director for student affairs, the ongoing departmental assessments. And so we've even begun to include well-being and COVID-19 questions in our surveys and satisfaction surveys after programs and services. And then what are we learning from the data that we're collecting? One, identifying different ways to provide mental health. And so it's more than just students wanting to do counseling one-on-one. So what are some other things that we can do? So we've initiated mental health, mental awareness days throughout the academic year. Actually today, April 7th, is designated as a mental health day for our students. Being intentional about check-ins with students. So not just remaining surface level with our conversations, but really tapping into getting to know our students more intentionally so that we can better assist them. Programming. Our students, our organizations have become very innovative in how they are maximizing engagement in programming in a virtual setting. And so some examples that I included was from our Residence Hall Association. They have virtual cooking classes called Tasty Tuesdays. Within the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life, they've leveraged this virtual space to increase their leadership workshops across the board. And then in the Office of Student Activities, we do Trivia Thursday via Instagram. And so utilizing social media to engage with students. And then hosting programs such as Trap Bingo, Crank and Paint, and then also a virtual escape room. So we're becoming even more innovative in how we are providing programs to students that are engaging, even though we don't have that full face-to-face experience. And then recognizing the impact of staff during this time as it relates to student engagement involvement. And so individuals who thrive off of student interaction, such as myself, thinking about how that's impacting the work that I'm doing. And so finding different ways to develop the staff intentionally that provide frameworks to support our students during this time as well has also been a key learning point from the assessments that we are receiving and data points we're receiving from our students.
Thank you, Kellie. I'm just going to pass it to Renée now.
Hi, all again. So the University of Oregon, we're nestled in the lush Willamette Valley, 50 shades of green, very, very beautiful area geographically. It's an easy drive to the Pacific Ocean, Cascade Mountains. We're really well known for our research and our teaching. We're a public flagship institution founded in 1876. We have a lot of schools and colleges and about 21,000 students and sometimes more. But during the pandemic, we saw a slight decline in enrollment. So we're also a predominantly white institution and a member of the Association of American Universities. You can follow us on Twitter. And as you've heard today so far, there's been a lot of focus in higher ed on metrics pertaining to student success, well-being, and belonging being one of those, and how those relate to graduation and retention. And as we're all aware, compounded by the recent societal issues that are becoming part of our daily conversations on how we can improve our campus and community, it's really vital. And I think we can all agree that the student journey is very dynamic. It's not linear. There are lots of spaces and places where students engage and interact with us, and this could be similar for some, but there's vast differences in intensity, and they can be individualized based on what students are bringing to campus with them, based on their own personal experiences or background characteristics. So I've been very fortunate in my Office of Assessment and Research within the Division of Student Life. For quite some time, we've really come to live and breathe the whole motto that by understanding how our students experience campus and have a positive experience with us, or more simply put, the relationships between academic achievement, retention, and graduation, and the different learning, co-curricular learning experiences they have in our division, how can we learn from this information? How can we utilize that information to make more effective decisions around how we invest in programs, how we build capacity, and really how we meet our students where they're at when they come to us? And so really the goal that I hope to share with you is how our work has centered around students' well-being and how we've created an overall structure to do some baseline measurement. It's a longitudinal design to really do follow-up over time and really just figure out at the end of the day what's working, what's not, and how can we improve that overall student experience and make it a more positive experience for our students. I do want to mention our Assistant Director, Dr. Brian Clark. He's played a very integral role to making sure that this program moves forward. I'm very blessed in our department. We're a two-person shop, but we're a small but mighty team. And this model that we implemented back in 2016 really has served as a guide to help us do our work, to really just understand, are we doing the right things? What's working well? And ultimately, are we doing things right? And how can we improve? So before we go into the next slide, I just want to give you some summary on this project since it's been around for quite some time. Is for the past 3 years, we've measured a lot of different types of aspects of belonging, which I'll talk about in a minute. But more importantly, we've looked at place-based sense of belonging. And so the places that students self-select that they feel like they belong. And over the past 3 years, we found that our student union, our recreation center, and our library are often the top places where students feel like they belong. And then if you aggregate the many different student housing areas, we are a residential campus. Actually, when you aggregate that, that becomes number 2. So we actually found that large open spaces are more inclusive, and students are self-selecting to indicate that those are the places they feel like they most belong. And the interest-oriented places, people are going to see people like them. They want to go to the Women's Center because they want to see people like them. They want to go to our Multicultural Center, our Black Culture Center, because people look like them. And then there's also the other aspect where students engage in interest-oriented programs because they want to meet people different from them so they can engage. Well, as you all know, COVID happened last year. So this kind of changed the dynamic of a residential campus. And so it's kind of shifted the way that we've been thinking about belonging. And we've also learned a lot just from previous years' data, since we've been collecting this for quite some time, is that certain spaces matter more to certain students. So for continuing generation students, the business center is much more inclusive to them than our first generation students. We found that the recreation center is not nearly as inclusive to our Asian students or some of our other students. And so we've learned a lot of really cool dynamics to that. And we can go to the next slide. And similar to what other people found on their campus, the pandemic and the rest of 2020, right, this kind of highlighting of racial injustice, although this has been going on for a long time, has genuinely made our undergraduate students feel sadder, less self-assured, and more stressed than they were a year prior. And so our incoming cohort of students, whether they're freshmen, transfer, non-traditional students, starting in the 2020-21 academic year, felt more sad and stressed out than years prior. And they were less excited about coming to the UO. We also found students who were graduating in 2020, 19% of them were offered a job, but it was rescinded due to COVID. We also found that COVID and remote learning has affected the way students engage in leadership experiences, and just overall, like socially, it became more difficult. And through this assessment that we've been doing for a couple of years, we were really well positioned to add a couple of questions. We ended up taking a hiatus from the place-based sense of belonging question aspect of our assessment, just because during the pandemic, we were all quarantined at the beginning when we were doing our spring follow-up. And so we decided to put that on a hiatus for now. But we ended up really looking at these other aspects of belonging. And we found that different groups of students were experiencing things somewhat differently. So for example, our spring follow-up happens in May through June. And so this is right in the peak of quarantine, the pandemic, the racial injustice that's being highlighted across our country. We noticed that our Black students had a heightened sense of self-esteem. They had a higher grit, and they had lower levels of sadness, which was interesting to see that. So to me and to our staff, we felt like that is a sign of some type of internal resilience that could possibly buffer against stereotype threat, the way that we certainty, like they didn't feel like they were equipped enough intellectually. They also had lower self-efficacy, which also kind of co-occurred with that lower sense of self-worth, which aka self-esteem. And so that was really interesting to see that during this time. And so anything around like self-confidence, building self-efficacy, and really focusing on self-empowerment, we were recognizing like these strategies were really important to note for our Asian students. We also noticed that our Native American and Alaskan Native students felt less social support from peers they could interact with socially. We are a predominantly white institution. Our Native and Alaskan population is really small. So some strategies around how do we connect with the great programs that do exist on our campus, and how can we build that social network, that village, that community, and really focus on academic self-efficacy within that population. We also noted during this time that our international students were experiencing a heightened ability uncertainty and lower self-efficacy. So they were feeling as if they weren't equipped enough to do well at the university. And so obviously strategies from our international student programming can focus on self-efficacy and building their self-esteem and self-empowerment, similar to our Asian students that we noticed. We also noticed that our transfer students were feeling more uncertain about their fit at the UO. Again, we are a residential kind of traditional campus. They were indicating that they didn't seem like they had peers to interact with socially, and they were less excited. They were actually the least excited of any of other groups coming to the university. And so kind of creating that community early on, connecting them to our traditional programs and our transfer student programs is really critical for them. We also noted our lower socioeconomic background students, so those who are first generation, low income, they struggle the most. They're less focused on self-care, they have less self-compassion, lower self-confidence, lower self-efficacy. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we need to get them connected. And so we've just learned so much from this process. We also learned that our LGBTQIA students and our non-binary students would facilitate, would actually do better with some social connections and community building. Also, we noted our female and women identifying students were coming in with extremely low self-esteem. And so through this process, we've been really well positioned to learn about how our students are experiencing campus, how they're experiencing things differently. And we can go to the next slide, Anne, please. So how we assess this on campus? As I mentioned, this has been going on for quite some time on our campus, and we've really been positioned institutionally to really do some really great research here. So before new student orientation, students as part of their checklists are asked to fill out, we call it a student life assessment. This assessment is a baseline measurement of lots of different constructs around well-being. Then every spring, they're invited to follow up and share their experience. And so it's a battery of assessment that goes all the way through their undergraduate experience. And then once they graduate, there's also a post-graduation piece. And we get a pretty large percentage of the freshman class incoming that participate in this. And of course, due to attrition with any longitudinal design, we do get some attrition throughout that process. But so the way we've classified it is kind of these buckets of things. So when we talk about belonging, as I mentioned, we have this place-based sense of belonging that's been really kind of cool to do, like heat mapping and having students connect. As I mentioned earlier, we put that on a hiatus because of COVID, because we are in a hybrid social distance model. Other things around social support, stereotype threat, loneliness, the things that we know matter to the human side. We also have things around general life satisfaction, health. We have all those emotional pieces that I was talking about, and some of our results revealed certain groups of students are lower self-esteem and lower self-efficacy than others. We also have an excitement scale. I think people forget that our students come to college to also have fun, to connect as humans, and they should be excited. And so it's interesting to see the excitement piece. And as I noted, our transfer students were less excited to come to the UO than any other group. The new scale that we're implementing is our food insecurity measures, because we did notice that we had a huge heightened need for food security during the pandemic. We actually were very fortunate to have donors come together, and we started our task force for our crisis fund for our students. And primarily, one of the main reasons they were applying is they needed food to eat. And so this is definitely something that we need to monitor. As we know, food security has a lot to do with belonging and mattering. Students will self-select to not participate based on food security, as we know that. And so that's something that we're monitoring very closely. And we can go to the next slide. So we've done a lot. We've learned a lot. We've learned how different students experience campus and what we can do early on to assist in getting students connected. And I think one of the biggest benefits of this process is we've been able to get permission from students as they're participating to ask them, hey, we know this stuff about you, we care about you, we want to build community, can we connect with you? And so we've done some really great email connection campaigns based on demographics from that incoming survey. So before students even step foot on campus, they're getting targeted communication from different student programs and different experiences based on their demographics. During the past year, we've had to get really creative with social belonging. We've been in a hybrid model. We've had students living on campus, but they're socially distanced, but we want to make sure that they're not isolated. And so we've done a lot of really cool things with virtual speakers, with breakout rooms. We've done stuff on social media, Instagram. We've done like holiday giveaways. We've had some hybrid programming, but obviously due to CDC guidance and social distancing, we haven't been able to have as many students. We've had really great success with our art exhibits. We've had great success with coaching and advising virtually and in person, so kind of having that hybrid model. We have a really great craft center, and we've done DIY craft kits. Discord has been really big for our esports program, and so we've kind of just tried to like measure this, see that our students really want to connect with peers. Social network and social belonging is so important for our student population, and we're seeing that in the data, and we're seeing it lower than in previous years due to the quarantine and due to the social distancing restrictions. And so we've learned a lot, and so we're doing our best to address it. But I think just be more inclusive around how we define the positive experience, how we define and measure student well-being, I think has helped us dig deeper and understand what practices matter. And yeah, so that's all I have.
Thanks, Renee. So we'll turn it over to Katie now to talk about Iowa Wesleyan.
Hey, everyone. A little overview about Iowa Wesleyan. We are located, like I said, in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, which is in the southeast corner of Iowa. And we have been a campus here since 1842. So we were the first co-educational institution in Iowa. So our diversity and providing opportunities for students has been something that's been here since we started. Another thing is we are a small private liberal arts college with a professional focus. We have a significant diversity, though. We are associate members of HAKU, and we are the only minority serving institution in the state of Iowa. We have high diversity here on campus. We are non-selective. We have high need, high percentage of students who are Pell eligible. It usually rates above 60%, 70%. And we are right about 50% first generation. Now, I have a little asterisk there because we have found that over the years, as we've been trying to track this information, there are different definitions of first generation. And so we have finally, as an institution, come up with our definition of what it means to be a first generation student so we can continue to collect that data more accurately. We have around 600 students. This year we are at 643. With the pandemic, we did see an increase in enrollment, which was something that we weren't expecting. We're looking forward to seeing how next year starts to with the continuation of all the different events from this year. We have 100 international students representing 30 different countries. And that has something that's been a little different this year because some of those students have had to be distance as opposed to on campus. And so we haven't been able to have a lot of the different fairs and events on campus to see those students and let them share their culture with us. But that is something that we do in a typical year. And we also are 70 to 80% student athlete. We are Division III. This summer, we are changing to NAIA. And so that'll be a different shift for our campus as well. But the majority of our students are student athletes. Some of them are participating in more than one sport. We recently joined an alliance with Southeastern Community College to form the Southeast Iowa Higher Education Alliance, or SIHEA. And they are a community college that is around 30 miles away from our campus, and it's going to provide some pathways for students within the region who earn their associates to go straight into a bachelor's program with some more streamlined processes and some different fundings between the two different schools to be able to help our students in the area and the region earn their bachelor's degree. So that's something that's really exciting. We also have been on campus all year. We've been here since August. We've offered a distance learning option for some of our students. And so we have had students on campus, we've had students in quarantine, and then we've also had students distance, whether it's somewhere else in the United States or in other countries, like I mentioned before. So as far as assessing different pieces, we've had multiple groups to kind of work with and figure out how to meet their needs based on their current situation with attending classes. It's made things a little bit interesting. But a big thing that we started last January is our institutional goal of student success. We have revamped our area up here where I'm at into a student success center. And so my position started last January in this role, as well as other different positions, because we were focusing on that belongingness, that mattering, that social support for our students pre-COVID. And so a lot of the different programs we have on our campus are a result of different assessments that have taken before, and now we're kind of trying them out, but we're trying them out in the pandemic era, which has been a little interesting. But I think it has also been able to provide students some additional supports, and it's been a chance to try out some of the things that we wanted to do. What we've noticed is that we started the conversation about retention and persistence in 2014, and that's where the student success piece came from. It's taken some years to kind of try out some different things. We've had different committees, different assessments that have happened to lead to this type of a program. We also have a WIN program on our campus. WIN stands for What I Need to Succeed, and it is for our conditionally admitted students. So these are students that are entering our institution with a GPA below 2.5 from high school or below an 18 on the ACT. So we have some additional supports for them to use as well. So that's a program that has been really helpful for our students. We are rural, and so having a very diverse campus in a very rural area has been definitely interesting. We have students from all these big cities across the country, and there's no Uber. You know, we have a small movie theater, we have a bowling alley, but we don't have a Chick-fil-A, or we don't have certain things. And so it's just provided some different opportunities for these students to try to learn about rural areas, and it's allowed our community to really learn about other areas, other countries as well. But it has also given us some different situations where we've had to talk to students about the difference before they come here. You know, you're not going to have a mall in town. You're not going to have these things. People in town may not look just like you. And so having some of those conversations with our students and what they're noticing, what they're seeing. We are a beacon campus. And so that means that we're working with Anthology to provide some supports for our students through an early alert system. And with this, we also have access to different assessments that we've been able to do to intentionally track some of this belonging, the mattering, social support with our students. And we noticed that over the past few years, we saw that our students, there were about 20 to 30% that would answer that they felt they didn't belong here. Whether it was because they just didn't, maybe they're first gen and they were trying to figure out college in general, or the location, maybe they were trying to figure out majors, maybe they just didn't feel like they fit in. And so we really wanted to target those groups and try to figure out what were some things that we could improve as a campus, what were some things that we could do before students got here to help with that. I think that, you know, Renee talked about that excited, how excited are they to be here, you know, having some of those conversations. So when students come on campus, they're excited, they're ready to start the year when they get here. First year students, we found through those assessments also didn't feel that connection to campus this year. We know that was because a lot of our orientation things were virtual, and we didn't get to have a lot of those fun activities where they could interact with each other and get to know each other beyond their athletic team or beyond who's in their major. And so that was something that we really were trying to find different things to do and find resources for them as well. And we have had conversations with students about not feeling safe on campus, being able to be themselves. We want our students to be able to be who they are, to speak their truth, to feel like they have a place where they feel safe to do that. And that is something that we've really been focusing on too with some of these assessments, and trying to really make sure that our students know that they belong here, and see what we can do to provide that for them. Something that we've also seen is we have become a JED campus. I'm not sure how familiar people are with that, but that's an opportunity that we have to work with students for mental health, life skills, different pieces like that, that we have used for some of these assessments. So how are we assessing? So we have something called an exit form, exit interviews that we do with students when they decide to leave our campus and transfer elsewhere, or just leave our campus in general. And what we found through those, we've been trying to figure out if students are leaving for financial reasons, for different pieces. And with the pandemic, it makes it a little bit harder because we can't necessarily sit down with these students and have those conversations. We can't connect with them as much. So we've been trying different ways to talk to students. Informal focus groups in the Student Success Center. So one of the areas on campus that a lot of students used to congregate in was the Student Success Center, when everybody was able to be there and we didn't really have the limitations on how many people could be in each space. They would come up here, they would meet with our staff, they would get to hang out with each other. And this provides a good space for us to have some conversations and to really get to know what our students are thinking and what they're feeling. And so we've had some informal focus groups. We also use our early alerts, as well as a multi-tiered system of support. We have formed a committee on campus that works with students to provide supports through different areas, whether it is social emotional, through academic. And so we're constantly monitoring students and trying to give them the supports that they need so they can be successful and stay here on campus. So using that data through all those different means is what we're using to kind of assess how our students are doing and kind of where they are. And then we also use the Anthology Beacon assessments, like I mentioned before. All first-year students complete a student strengths inventory twice in the first semester. So we're giving it to them when they first get on campus, that first week of class, and then that last week before finals. So we can kind of see along the way, what are some areas, what are some differences, what are we doing, what kind of supports do they need. All second-year students and above get a continuing students assessment in the spring semester every year. It has very similar questions, but then also a little bit more about graduation and what they're going to do beyond, different questions like that. So we can assess them every year as well. And then we've recently started to give the SSCI, the Social Support and Connectedness Inventory. And that gives us a chance to really delve into that belonging and that social comfort, because the social comfort is what we were seeing, some of the areas that students weren't so sure about when they first got on campus. And so this allowed us last semester to really see the breakdown of what those pieces were. So what we've done, especially during this year, is working with our student development office and different offices on campus to really try to support our students in a holistic way. One thing that we've done is we've changed the curriculum for our first year orientation course. We have student success coaches. Each student that comes on campus that deposits is assigned to a student success coach based on their major. These students then will have this person as their orientation course instructor. So they'll work with them from the spring semester all the way through until they meet with their faculty advisor to sign up for classes. So this person is going to go over life skills, going to connect them to campus resources, really going to provide them with that resource on campus when they come here that they feel like they can ask any questions to. If they're a little hesitant to go talk to financial aid, it gives them somebody they can go to before to kind of talk through some of those situations. We've also created a centralized list of resources and supports. So that way we know kind of what's offered on campus. We've trained faculty and staff and what those supports are. So at any point, if a student needs something, everyone is aware of kind of who to go to and what different things are available. We've also done faculty and advisor training as well as recognition. And so our faculty this year who have gone above and beyond during the pandemic, whether it's for their online classes or providing some additional supports, we've been trying to recognize them as the year goes on to kind of thank them, because it's been a rough year for students, but it's also been a rough year for faculty and staff with a lot of different changes. We've tried to streamline processes and procedures to make it easier for students to navigate the system. If a student wanted to withdraw, maybe minimizing how many offices they had to go to sign off on paper to get out of a class or to add a class, trying to work through and make sure that those processes were streamlined and student friendly. Creating and revising how we assess things, making sure that we're not over assessing, that each office isn't asking students the same questions. Creating new student groups with student input, peer mentorship opportunities for our sophomores and beyond, monthly activity kits. There is an example of a hot cocoa bomb. It's something that students can connect with, but then they're also doing it individually. So it's a way that we can do activities with the students still being socially distant. And then a big thing that we have added, our President Plunkett has really wanted to make sure students have a voice and have a space to share what they want and ask questions. And so we have implemented student town hall meetings virtually this year. Hopefully we can do them in person in the future. But it gives students and families a chance to get on and talk to cabinet, talk to administration, and ask questions. And so it's been a really good environment that we've set up. And we hope that more students will participate in the future to be able to share and feel comfortable that that's a space that they can do so with.
Thank you so much, Katie. Yeah. I'm turning my camera back on, and I think Renee and Dr. K can as well, and you, Katie. And we thank you so much for those great examples from your campus. We have a few questions that came in from people, so I might start with just a couple of those that came up about campus-specific things, but also even as someone's answering those, if the rest of you have other ideas that support that, feel free to jump in. Renee, there was a question for you about the assessments that you're doing and wondering whether you're doing that yourself out of student affairs, or are you collaborating with institutional research, like just how the survey itself is leveraged or administered?
It's all us, but we've worked within the institution to make it part of the checklist. So like we've worked very closely with new student orientation programs, but the development of the scales and the refinement of those is developed internally to our office.
Okay. And a follow-up it was to you about, because you had all the different populations of students that you were looking at targeted strategies for, and there was a question around targeted strategies for students with disabilities and whether or not you had one of those. But I'm sort of going to put that with for everyone as well, just generally, like how are you knowing and how are you collaborating and working and understanding how for students with disabilities, you know, their sense of belonging, or what's your assessment practice? So Renee, I'll let you start, but then the others, I'd love to know what you're doing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will mention all this information is shared pretty widely within our institution. Obviously, we've developed it within the framework of student affairs and the work that we do co-curricularly. However, we recognize that a lot of the information is helpful across campus. And so we have a lot of campus partners that we share with. We do have a self-identified question around that. We just haven't had a significant enough population to be able to disaggregate it by. Our Office of the Registrar is really strict in how we disaggregate information. So we just haven't quite had enough data. But it's something we're tracking on. I've also worked pretty closely with our accessibility center to do some data mining with on the back end to see if there's some data that we can share with them. But in terms of presenting that at a larger scale, we just haven't been able to in the confines of the way our policy reads.
Dr. K or Katie, other things you're doing around that?
Great question. I literally just hosted a webinar at 12 o'clock today around accessibility services and student engagement at HBCUs. And the overarching thing is we're not assessing it as we should. And so that is a topic that I am bringing to the forefront, and how we can engage with our accessibility services area. But also, what does accessibility services look like in student affairs? And so most of the talk around it is around academics. But when we think about student activities, you know, Greek life, campus rec, those types of things, how are we including those students? They may have some disabilities. And then also when we think about diversity and equity and inclusion and the planning, how are we engaging our students to participate in leadership opportunities? And so those conversations are going to begin to happen starting tomorrow, probably after this webinar that I hosted earlier today. So yeah, definitely great question, great topic.
That's helpful. That's good. Yeah, I mean, it's not good to know that's the fact, but it's good to know that people are thinking about it, and we're starting to recognize, probably as with many things, differential impact and more significant impact during the pandemic on populations where already things can be there can be barriers, right? Literally physical and other kinds of barriers to success. So thanks for that. Katie, I don't know if you have a response to that, but there was also a question specifically to you about the student success coaches and whether or not those were faculty or staff, or like where they sit in your organization to the support of the coaching.
So we also house accessibility services up here too. And so our director of accessibility works alongside me to work with the students. And so a lot of our assessments have been informal. We're meeting with the students one-on-one, talking about things, but getting that data, again, it's hard to get the numbers that we need to truly look at it. And then also just being more intentional with that piece too. So the student success coaches are actually staff. They're going to be teaching too, but they're not considered faculty. We've coined the term faculty on our campus. There's those of us that are staff and faculty, but we're not tenured, but we're kind of in the middle of doing everything. So we're our faculty. And so they're staff, they have master's degrees, and we try to get a diverse background so that students can kind of find someone they connect with. And a big thing up here is that we try to make sure that there's somebody up here that people will feel comfortable with. You know, not everyone's going to feel comfortable coming and talking to me, but they might feel comfortable talking to their coach or to somebody else up here. So creating an area where there's different offices and resources so that when students come up here, they can connect to somebody at this time. So, yeah.
Thank you. So Hello, Alice Mitchell is asking a good question. Dr. K, I know you're working closely with Dr. Mitchell. She has a question. I'm going to direct it to everyone here, and I think it's a great question. She said, based on like maybe the research that we've done at Anthology, plus all of your experiences, we're getting a pretty good experience or sense of what is involved in belonging and mattering during a pandemic. But she's asking us to look into the future and think, what do we think our students are going to expect going forward? Because you all mentioned things that you're doing with the assessment results. Some of that may be ongoing, and some of that may have been, targeted specifically at strategies while students are remote or while we're still in the middle of the pandemic. So what do you think students are going to expect with town halls with the president and their voice on campus and some of the services that maybe that are new? Like, what's your sense about that going forward?
I'll start. I'm going to say that what we're finding and what I'm noticing in the pandemic, I noticed before the pandemic. The gift, and I use that loosely, of the pandemic was it allowed these things to surface, right? And so now you have to do X, Y, and Z because of the pandemic. And so I think when you think about our students, we have a majority population of African Americans. Racial injustice will always be here. And it is in the way that, I always talk about the Breonna Taylor verdict and how that happened and how I was able to come to a HBCU campus and have conversations with people that look like me versus my colleagues that look like me and students that look like me that did not have an HBCU to go to, and they didn't have people that look like them to have that conversation, and how what's going on in society is impacting our students and how that's impacting how they look at higher education and the jobs that they take, et cetera, especially around DEI work. And that for us, that are a part of these diverse communities, that's life. That's just not work. That's just life for us. And so when I think about belongingness, mattering, and social support in the pandemic, it's the same things that they were experiencing beforehand. It's just now the Band-Aid has been removed. And so I'm challenging my colleagues to say, okay, how do we become innovative in this space now? Because we can't say that we don't have to do it. We do now have to do it. And so it's the innovation piece for me is how do we move forward? How do we utilize the fact that before, when I asked the question of how do we engage with distance learning students, people said, oh, we don't have to. That's why they're distance learning. And now all of your students, for the most part, are distance learning. So how are we engaging with distance learning students? So how do we become more innovative in our ways?
I think just to kind of echo what Dr. K is saying, I think what's really kind of been cool about the pandemic, it's also kind of ripped that Band-Aid off of what we've already kind of noticed before the pandemic. But I also think it's this other validation of the importance of co-curricular and the importance of student affairs as a profession. We have seen that social belonging, mattering, these things matter. They always have, and they're so important specifically for marginalized communities. And I think it's just validated the reason why we exist, because I know that in some places and spaces and institutions, there's been that battle between staff and faculty and the importance of what we're giving and providing for the campus community. And I think that the pandemic has, for me as a student affairs professional, just validated why we exist. And it's been really cool to talk about the value added of the profession and why it's so important that we get up every day and do the work that we do for our students. And I think as an assessment person in this world, it's been really nice for me to translate that information to my colleagues and peers, and just seeing that enlightening, that validation is so powerful for our staff. And to me, that's been kind of cool. I don't know what to expect for fall. We've done a lot of measurement throughout this time. I think those similar strategies are going to be similar, whether social network development happens in a virtual space or an in-person space. That's still a need for some of our students, and really doing more targeted strategies, approaches to working with our communities, I think is important, and I don't think that's going to change. And I just wanted to note that I think it's really a great time to be in student affairs, because we have seen this matters for our students. It matters for their well-being and their success.
And I also add too, we don't know what this incoming class is going to have experienced in the last 2 years. You know, they may have been virtual for a year and a half, and what are some things that they're going to need for support, and how is that going to be different from our current students? And we're actually looking at offering a second chance orientation for our returning second year students who maybe want some more of those hands-on opportunities. And so I see a lot of these things continuing. It may look a little different in the future, but I think the effect of the pandemic and incoming students is going to be around for a while. And at some point, you know, they've had some sort of experience within high school or elementary school, who knows, and kind of being aware of that as we move forward too.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, is there any closing thoughts that you all want to share? We want to leave a little time at the end, particularly for Renee, to talk about student affairs assessment leaders and how they can support the work that all of you are doing. But any closing thoughts?
My closing thought, one is thank you for the opportunity to be here, to bring, for me especially, to bring notice to HBCUs in this conversation. And I guess my call to action would be, when you think about, always think about the people that are not at the table, that don't have the voices at the table, and how are you engaging them in terms of belongingness. And I charge people to, you know, limit how much you use your student leaders and utilize more the students that may not be in a leadership position to help guide some of the work that you're doing.
Very good.
I'll just add that in the world of higher ed and all the metrics thrown at us, we just need to be more holistic with the way that we measure things, which I think is evidence today that we're all kind of doing this innovative work. But then at the end of the day is not to forget about the student stories and to forget about using that to contextualize some of the quantitative pieces. I know that our field is predominantly quantitative, and qualitative is such an important facet of the work that we do. And so just make sure we don't forget about the student stories. They have a lot of value to contextualize the work that we do.
I'd say ditto. I mean, I think that it's very important, and that qualitative data is so key, and building those relationships, you know, no matter what we do, that relationship building is going to be the core, and really continuing to do that. So thanks for this opportunity. And if anyone else has ideas, I'm excited to hear what other campuses are doing and what they've seen. So that's it.
Exactly. And I'll mention a follow-up again at the end here. And we'll provide email addresses for our panelists as well, so that if you want to be in direct contact with them, or if you want to share ideas with us, we're always learning, right? So that's part of the point of this conversation, even though we're the ones doing the talking today. So we want to hear from people. So I'm going to turn it over to Renee for a minute. I think I still have the ability to advance the slides. Let's see. There we go. Okay, good. Renee?
So today we've been talking about belonging and mattering. Well, for professional staff focusing on assessment and research and student affairs, we have a community for you, and it's been around for a while, and it's more than a listserv. So the Student Affairs Assessment Leaders is a great organization, all volunteer-based, free and accessible. So if you're not familiar with us, there is our website. I believe it's going to be dropped in the chat as well. You can click join, you can sign up for our listserv and get connected to the many different experiences we have. Anywhere from networking and support, if you have a question around how to approach a research study or an assessment or a question or who's doing what, the listserv is a great place to post questions and get support, validation for the work that we're doing. There's a lot of informal meetings that happen at many of the different conferences. We have a pretty active social media account. We have professional development. We have structured conversations, which are our monthly webinars to talk about different topics around student affairs assessment. If you want to dig a little bit deeper, or if you're new to the field of assessment and research in student affairs, we have an open online course that's free. It's an 8-week course. There's a lot of information on our website about that. We also have a professional development calendar that I maintain. So it's like a one-stop shop. If you want to kind of see different opportunities, that's the place to go. We have a blog, so we invite guest bloggers all the time. You don't necessarily have to be part of the blog team. We do have open calls every year. We have a resource repository if you need even just anything from like you're hiring a research assistant and you need a job description. We've put together a lot of things like that for you. We have just lots and lots of data. We have our YouTube account with past conversations, lots of information, and we also have a peer-reviewed publication through our Journal of Student Affairs Inquiry. So there's a huge community for you. Again, it's free, open, and accessible. I invite you to join, even if you just become part of our listserv, but to hear and be connected with a lot of the opportunities. So thank you.
Thank you, Renee. And I'm just going to wrap us up here with just a quick mention. Oh, here we go again. We've also, I think Tyler also dropped the link for the website into the chat, and we'll also have it in a follow-up email. So I'll just mention at the end here that we've got resources as well as at Anthology. And particularly Katie was talking about one of the things. We do a lot of different things, but one of them is the student support inventories and the social comfort inventories. So those are within our Beacon platform. So if you're interested in wanting to learn more about that, Tyler will drop that in the chat. And then I mentioned this pandemic student experience white paper earlier in the conversation. And so you can look at the full report and we will share that with you as well. You can just download that from our website. So after this webinar, which we're wrapping up now, you'll get an email from us and it'll have links to some of the resources we mentioned today. There'll be a recording of this. And we just really appreciate your time, and feel free to respond if you have additional questions or thoughts that you want to offer. And I don't know, panelists, if you want to turn your cameras back on for a second, and we'll just wrap things up here. If there's any other questions, I know we're a few minutes early, but I want to thank our panelists for their expertise and for the time that and labor they invested in getting ready and collaborating with one another. It's one of the things I love about this work is folks that may or may not know each other, and we're working together on common things, and we learn from each other while we're also, sharing our own stories. So thank you all so much for your wisdom, and I look forward to all of the things that you all are doing and that all of our participants are doing on their campuses to support all of our students. I hope you all have a great afternoon, and thanks for joining.